Queen Victoria by Deirdre Sherman, World Leaders Past and Present Book Review. So this is another one in the series of World Leaders Past and Present books. These are a series of biographies that are aimed at kind of a junior high school audience, which I read one year when I was in Japan just because they were the only history books I could get my hands on for some time. From the Oita Prefectural Library in Oita Prefecture, Japan. Anyways, I'll link down below in the description to the other videos I have in this series and one video kind of explaining what these books are. But for the purposes of this video, I'll just jump right into it. So I didn't know anything, hardly, about Queen Victoria before reading this book. I recognized the name, of course, and I knew that, you know, she was associated with the 19th century, but that's it. I've since then gone on to rectify that by listening to a few audiobooks and podcasts on British history generally, and then some other books that dealt with Queen Victoria. So I'm better informed than I was 10 years ago. This is one of my old reviews, by the way. So this is a book I read 10 years ago. Anyways, Queen Victoria is a fascinating figure, and her reign, a lot of fascinating things happened. You know, the 19th century British Empire is a fascinating subject. Has a lot of colorful figures in it, people like David Livingstone, Cecil Rhodes, Chinese Gordon, all of whom are in this book, by the way. But also the Industrial Revolution, horrible conditions for the working class, and the rise of socialism, and Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, who were both living and writing in Victorian England, and they are also mentioned, albeit briefly, in this book. As for Queen Victoria herself, like I said before starting this book, I didn't know anything about her, but I learned a lot of fascinating things. For example, it was not certain that she would ascend to the throne. There were a few other people in line before her, but it was her constant plotting by her mother that ensured that she got the throne eventually. I also learned about the Kensington system. Now this was interesting. This was the system of education that her mother had designed for Queen Victoria. If memory serves right, if memory serves, the name Kensington system comes from the Kensington Palace where she was being raised, I think. And she tried to control and regulate Queen Victoria, before she became queen. Young Victoria, control who had access to her. All of this would later backfire on her mother tremendously, because once Queen Victoria ascended to the throne, she distanced herself from her mother and would not let her mother come near any of the levers of power in the palace. So classic example of a controlling mother backfiring. Another interesting thing I learned, young Queen Victoria caused a political crisis and accidentally toppled a Tory government when she refused to remove her chambermaids. Although, actually, I should mention, I mentioned I've read a few other books since then. I think I read at least one other book that said that was actually what the Tory government wanted. Like, they knew they weren't ready to come to power, so they created the Bedchamber crisis. That's not the perspective I got from this current book I'm reviewing, though. But whatever. I also learned from this book about Victoria's marriage to Prince Albert, who comes from the German Principality of Saxe-Coburg. And he died quite young and absolutely devastated Queen Victoria. For the rest of her life was kind of in mourning for him. So that was another thing that was in this book. But before Prince Albert died, Prince Albert was an interesting guy, and there's some interesting facts about him, like all the effort he went through to keep England out of the US Civil War. So this is something that was not covered in my history classes growing up in the US. But England almost got involved in the war, and Prince Albert was able to help steer a course to keep England out of the war. One of the things, there was the Trent Affair, in which the Union government captured a British ship, or detained a British ship, on which 2 Confederate diplomats were traveling on a British ship, and the Union government arrested the Confederate diplomats off of the British ship, which caused a huge diplomatic crisis and almost got Britain involved in the war. Prince Albert got himself involved in that crisis and helped to keep Britain out of the war during that time. So that whole thing about the Trent Affair was quite interesting. I also learned from this book how Queen Victoria loved Disraeli, the leader of the Conservative Party. Disraeli himself was a very fascinating figure. Queen Victoria hated Gladstone, the leader of the Liberal parties. Gladstone himself, another fascinating figure. I learned in this book how Queen Victoria asked for and was given the title of Empress of India. So this is something she specifically asked for, and they gave it to her. So yeah, all in all, a very fascinating book about a very fascinating time in England's history. I don't know if I'd recommend this one per se, although if you happen to be in a library that has it, why not? You know, this whole series is about 30 years old now, so chances are you wouldn't come across this book, but any biography of Queen Victoria should be fascinating. And by the way, this is the last book in this series now, at least my last review of this series. So to recap, I've done Robespierre, Danton, Thomas Paine, Napoleon, Lenin, Clemenceau, and Queen Victoria. So 7 books in the World Leaders Past and Present series have been reviewed now on this channel, and those are all the books I read from this series. So that's it. Moving on to a different book next time.